you were definitely a Rolen supporter. I don't think you've hesitated that much in putting yourself in that category.
Not at all. There was somebody showed me a photograph of a casebook, Cooperstown casebook that I signed. Came out in 2017 before Scott Rolen was on the ballot, and I wrote to the guy, "We'll get Scott Rolen into the Hall of Fame someday." It was really nice to be reminded of that yesterday because I've been stumping for him for day one, and really was pretty emotional and pretty excited when Josh Rawitsch called his name yesterday.
That turned into pardon the cliche, a real nail biter. I mean, I'm sitting there and I'm like, I just don't know. And then even the guys that I think we both respect who were there, Jason Stark and, some others, you could tell that they were feeling some kind of anxiety and they didn't know which way this was going to go. And as it turned out, I mean, Scott Rolen got voted in by a margin of 5 votes. So it was really, really close. And maybe I'm greedy here because I'm just glad he's in, but I was just talking about it. It kind of surprises me really that perhaps it was such a close call that he didn't get more of the percentage of the vote, that he had to sweat this out.
Yeah, look, I find it a little bit frustrating. There was certainly a lot of suspense. I mean, anybody who says that the ballot tracker has taken the suspense out of this stuff, I don't know, man. I was refreshing that thing every 5 minutes yesterday, seeing the ballots come in. It was really only the last hour before the election where it's like, oh, this is getting there. He only needs 68% or 69% on the private ballots. And that's not the same as needing 75% on those private ballots. So when 63% last year seemed like that's close enough that it should be doable, and it has been in some cases. But when I looked, I think it was something like 4 out of 11 guys who got that and had eligibility remaining. In this, let's call it 60 to 65% range. And I have the exact breakdown somewhere, and probably in my original role and profile. Got in the next year, which surprises me. Less than half got in the next year. Most of them took 2 years. I'm looking at Billy Wagner right now with 68% here, and it's still, it's 14 out of 30 with eligibility remaining got in the next year, 21 out of 30 within 2 years. So these are not gimmies, because there are voters who do cast blank ballots because they feel like membership has been too watered down, or they do cast these one-man ballots that just scream, "Look at me, I'm more important than the process," and make a clown show of it. And it's those voters we have to blame for prolonging this. I mean, some voters, they'll put two names on a ballot, and they won't look at anybody until they get to 65%. They feel like it's their job to do the coronation. They don't want to do the field work to build these candidacies up. It's frustrating, but I've learned to play ball with it, so to speak, and just to map out the terrain and help people understand that this stuff doesn't happen overnight, and the guy getting 60% in his year 6 is by no means eliminated from consideration. It bodes well or whatever.
Yeah, there's other things that are frustrating about it. Listen, I got to confess that in the past I've been guilty of this. I like to think I'm always trying to learn and get better. And I voted for a long time and probably will again. But the whole thing about, he's either a Hall of Famer or not, although I was never quite that rigid. In other words, if you don't vote him in right away, then, he's not a Hall of Famer then, because if he's a Hall of Famer, you vote for him. And just turning into that whole black and white thing and no gray area at all, no nuance, no understanding that how the ballot works, how many names are on it, and from year to year the ballot changes in terms of strength or weakness. And that's always been irritating too. And the other thing is, and I'm guilty of being of generalizing here, but it was interesting to read some stuff that Jason Stark wrote about this. It seems like the old school small hall types really didn't support Rolen as much as I would have assumed, because he sort of personifies what they claim to believe in. But the people, the younger voters, more informed voters who really do the field work, as you say, we're all over Rolen. And I find it interesting we still have that separation, the old school versus the people that, frankly, will go to Fangraphs and live on Fangraphs to try to get everything they need to know about a guy's performance. Are you surprised that gap is still there to the point that it is?
Surprised, but not overwhelmingly so. I mean, I can't look at the last half decade or decade of voting and not appreciate the inroads that the point of view that I've been selling has made. We've gotten so many, let's call them stat head favorites into the hall, based on, utilizing WAR and utilizing JAWS and, looking at fielding data and just moving beyond how many runs did he drive in. I mean, Jim Rice would not get elected today. Just to use one example, Jeff Kent, a guy who has the most home runs by a second baseman, spent 10 years on the ballot, didn't even get past the halfway point until his 10th year. And some of that's a product of the fact that he debuted on the strongest modern ballot ever with 14 guys at the JAWS standard or higher, and just, was not one of the 10 best for most people. But it's just this. There are still old school voters out there. They are decreasing in number. I don't want to say that just because they disagree with me, they shouldn't be voting. A lot of them are wonderful people.
Right.
You got to learn to remember that just because somebody disagrees with you on the Hall of Fame thing doesn't mean they are not one of the best writers in the industry sometimes, or a quality human being. We get worked up about this stuff, but
right.
It's just one small aspect of our jobs. So I think that's important to remember. But it does frustrate me. But there's enough things working against the older writers in this industry. Being losing their jobs in media consolidation, being sunsetted from the electorate. Sooner or later, I mean, already I think the balance is tilted. Sooner or later, it's going to tilt even more so in our direction. So I don't think we need to belabor that too much.
Yeah, you're right, and I didn't mean to do that. Although I did it. I tend to overreact to these things when I want to make a debate. I go too far with it. But it's like you're right. There have been any number of examples of guys voted in recent years that would have had no chance back in the so-called olden days. And so there's been tremendous progress made. You're right about that. So I'm gonna remember you, Jay, next time I'm about to go off on this stuff. So
yeah.
Hey, for one other thing on Rolen, if there's a Cardinal fan or baseball fan listening and they think, Rolen was a really good player. I don't know if he's a Hall of Famer. Boy, he hit 316 home runs. I mean, he didn't get close to 500. He didn't do this. He didn't do that. All due respect, I'm not sure about this. And, what would you do to, gently make the case that he really is a Hall of Famer? And to a lot of us, it's kind of like a no doubt Hall of Famer because, the counting stats or the volume, as you pointed out, the volume, sometimes we all put, or a lot of people put a big premium on volume. And so in effect, like what were your case? What were your talking points on the case for Scott Rolen?
Okay. So top five fielder, maybe even top three fielder. I mean, he's third in fielding runs of the position, despite much less playing time than the two guys above him, Brooks Robinson and Adrian Beltre. Maybe top 15 hitter, somewhere between the top 10 and 20, depending on whether you're looking at rate stats or counting stats among third basemen. 122 career OPS plus, 10th in career WAR, about 70, 10th in JAWS at the position. Above the average Hall of Famer at the position, and it's an underrepresented position within the Hall of Fame. And if you're a St. Louis fan, I think you really got the best of Scott Rolen. 2004, he had a 9+ WAR season. He was more valuable than than Albert Pujols on a team that won the pennant, and that was a really strong team and just ran into the buzzsaw of the Red Sox. And he was also one of the stars of the 2006 World Series team. And I know that 2006 team, limped into the playoffs and wasn't any good. They were not nearly as good as the 2014, but they actually won the damn thing. And he helped the Cardinals win a World Series. So I would think, you'd have Cardinals fans would have a special affection for him just on that front. It didn't end well for him in St. Louis, battling with Tony La Russa, battling injuries. And Scott Rolen was a guy who publicly did not say a lot, but behind the scenes certainly made his voice heard and didn't always agree with the authority. And in St. Louis, as I understand it, obviously Tony La Russa's authority was pretty large, and John Mozeliak said something to the effect like, it was a spite trade to trade him to Toronto, and like it was a mistake. It was just like, we are going to get you out of here and make sure you don't like it. So
right,
I quote the whole thing in my piece, and he's like, he admitted it was a mistake. So, I think it's worth remembering. He was also run out of town on a rail in Philadelphia because he wouldn't sign a $110 million extension. For whatever reason, and both Larry Bowa and Dallas Green had put him on blast publicly more than once. And so, Phillies fans, some of my colleague Dan Zimborski joked that if he went in with a Phillies cap on his plaque, Phillies fans would call the Hall of Fame and demand that his plaque be removed.
It is interesting, and I got to know him pretty well, and really enjoyed having conversations with him. But he still has, I imagine, such an anti-authoritarian streak, and it's like he couldn't help himself. And the other thing too is like he would never call anyone out, but so if he got called out, and La Russa wrote him a letter. In part of that letter, he questioned Roland's effort, and that was the point of like that's it. That's a point of no return. I'm just deeply offended that my effort would be questioned. And I get it. And I talked to Rolen the night he got benched in the NLCS Game 6, before Game 6, and I don't know if I've ever seen such controlled rage in my life. In other words, he didn't curse, he didn't fling insults, he didn't shout, but it's just like all his fury was contained. He was so bothered by that. But maybe La Russa knew what he was doing. I mean, because from that point on, Rolen was a terror in Game 7 and the rest of the World, and then the 5-game World Series. So he certainly had an interesting career that way, that contrarian streak. But I don't think it ever affected how hard he played.
Yeah, I mean the guy was, he had a lot of absences in his career due to injuries because he was, putting out such all-out effort, and his back and his shoulders and whatever, took the brunt of that. But any year, I forget what the threshold is, but any year that he had at least, I think, 100 games played, he was 4 wins above replacement or better. That's 11 seasons, pretty much. And just like if he was available, he was a star caliber player,
right?
And that he did what he did while without the volume and still getting to number 10 all time in Jaws is pretty impressive. On a per plate appearance basis. He was twice as valuable as Jimmy Rollins, for example, who's obviously Phillies fans have a much softer spot for him than they do for Rolen. And he probably could have been a legitimate shortstop in the major leagues too, just the largest one. But he was that good defensively. Somebody said I never paid money. I never bought a ticket to see Scott Rolen, and Matthew Leach, who covered the Cardinals for MLB.com, for a long time, and I'm sure said I covered them, and I would have done that because he did something every night that either at the bat, on the bases, or in the field that was spectacular, and I thought that carried a lot of weight. When I was battling back and forth with people on Twitter yesterday in the wake of his election.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I was in awe, and to keep in mind, I grew up in my epitome of a third baseman. Growing up where I did was Brooks Robinson, but I get to
Yeah.
St.
Oh,
Louis,
yeah.
and I'm like, well, this guy's just as good. And I called Brooks one time. I said, I apologize. I actually said that Rolen was in your classes defensively, and he said, well, he is. What do you apologize for, guys? The guy's great. I love watching him play third base more than I do any other player. And Brooks also graciously said, "Nah, I'm not the greatest third baseman of all time. Nolan Arenado is." So he, many other reasons to love Brooks, but that humility was pretty cool. But yeah, everything you said there was right. Hey, I don't want to take up much of your time. I know you're working up on these follow-up pieces, like looking at the candidates that are moving forward. But I just wanted to touch on that really quick. What are Beltre? Adrian Beltre goes on next year, and I don't know if there are any other notables that you think are very prominent. But the guys that came close this year that didn't get it, Helton and Wagner specifically, maybe Andrew Jones. Just give us a rough early look at the 2024 ballot and what you kind of think how you think it's going to go at this early stage. Yeah, and it's we won't hold anything against you because it can change. Right.
So it's not just Adrian Beltre, who with 3,000 hits, and I think it's the number 3 ranking in Jaws at his position, third or fourth, is a slam dunk. He'll go in easily 90+%. We've also got Joe Mauer on the ballot, and while Mauer's time at catcher was short, while he kind of the last 5 years of his career, he was a comparatively light hitting first baseman. He's still 7th in Jaws among catchers with the 5th highest peak of all time. No brainer for me. Really nice career, 3-time batting champion, MVP, rookie of the year. I don't know what else you want. Easy choice for me, but I think we're going to be in a situation where we're battling for ballot space because you've got 5, these 5 prominent holdovers in Helton, who's a gimme putt away. Wagner, who realistically, he's got 2 years left on the ballot. 68%. That still is often a 2-year process, not a 1-year process, unfortunately. And then you've got Andrew Jones at 58% with 4 years to go. He's in good shape long term, but he could kind of idle a bit next year. Gary Sheffield's in his 10th year with 55%. I don't think he can get to 75%, but we do have the recent example of Larry Walker to look at. He was at 54.6 going in and just nosed across that line as well. I think it was 6 votes over the line. So there's hope there. You've got Carlos Beltran, who made a solid debut at 46.5%, and I think figures to cross 50% next year, if nothing else. I think he's probably still going to take a while to, for people to come around in the wake of his transgressions with the sign stealing. But long term, I like his odds of getting in. So that's a very crowded ballot, and I haven't even mentioned Chase Utley, who's going to be who's a stat head favorite, who I'm going to find room for sure.
And we're going to have that old school stat head argument about Utley. We don't have to get into that right now, but you're right. There's no doubt about it. Jay Jaffe, thanks for all you do. Thanks for your time today. I know you're a very busy man, and we will continue to support Fangraphs and turn to you for insight on all baseball matters, but your particular specialty, which is the Hall of Fame. So thank you so much, sir.
All right. Thanks a lot, Bernie. Much appreciated, and best to you and your listeners.
All right. That's our friend Jay Jaffe from Fangraphs. Yeah, Utley's in that category of, what about his counting? He doesn't even have 2,000 hits, He got to the majors kind of late, and then he had some injuries. And so if you look at the volume of just how much he played, it's light. But when he played, my goodness, when he played, he was formidable, to say the least. I think Mauer, I don't know if he'll get in first ballot, but I think he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. Beltre is, in fact, a slam dunk, and I would imagine Helton will get in there, maybe Wagner. It's going to be a tougher one next year. So it's good that Rolen kind of got over the 75% bar just in time, because next season, who knows? I mean, he could have been, say he didn't get in this year, but he was sitting there around, say he came in with about 70% this time or whatever. I don't know that he would have gotten in next year, which again, and all that that has nothing to do with, like, is he a Hall of Famer or not? It has everything to do with, well, what are the changes to the ballot? Who are some of the first-time guys on there? And, all of a sudden, a ballot that doesn't look particularly strong one year, all of a sudden it's very crowded with strong candidates, 1 year later. But some people just can't process that, and it's, I guess I get it, because like I said, I've dabbled in that myself, and I was even going on complaining earlier this week, or maybe late last week, that because this ballot in 2023 wasn't a particularly heavy ballot in terms of, like, first-time eligibles who would soak up a lot of votes. That's what I said. So what would be the reason they wouldn't vote for Rolen? Because it's easy to vote for Rolen right now. You don't have to make that choice that makes you sick to your stomach. Oh, man, I got one spot left. Is it this guy or that guy? They're both all, It was never easier to vote for Rolen than it was this season. And it even now bugs me why people just didn't recognize that. And just like, look, let's, sure, he's a Hall of Famer, and the time is right. This is actually a very good time to make sure he gets in. So he got in. So nothing else to complain about. Before I go and take this break, though, I got one more Rolen thing as far as his base running skill. And he had great base running skill. There's that stat that I use. It's called extra bases taken. And that doesn't mean stolen bases, not at all. It means, you're on first, your teammate hits a single. Do you advance an extra base by getting a third? Second to home on a single, first to home on a double. Advancing a base on a ground out or a fly ball, right? In other words, how opportunistic are you, and how many times do you use your instincts and your speed, athleticism, to get an extra base as a runner? And so you look at Rolen, 6'4", 245 pounds, but on the bases, the guy was fundamentally pristine. He knew how to cut the bag. He didn't waste any motion. He was really efficient. Just in terms of, like, the physical skill of going from base to base. He knew how to save ground, not waste ground with, running into second on the way to third, but being really sloppy about it and having to sort of readjust once he got past second, because it wasn't a smooth touch at second, things like that. And he actually did run better than you would think for a guy his size. If you close your eyes and remember 2004 and some of those years, Scott Rolen trucked around the bases at a pretty good rate. But anyway, let me get to you my stat of the day on this. There's a lot of things that can tell us how good of a base runner he was. But I got one that made me smile today. When in 6 years that Vince Coleman was a Cardinal, and we know Vince Coleman was lightning fast, he had an extra bases taken rate of 51%, which is good. Anything like high 40s, over 50%, really, really good. So Vince Coleman, one of the fastest runners in the history of baseball, extra bases taken rate, 6 years as a Cardinal, 51%. Scott Rolen, 6 years as a Cardinal, extra bases taken rate, 51%, the same as Vince Coleman. You know who would have bet on that? No one. I mean, it's amazing.
That's a crazy number.
Rolen had years with the Cardinals, like when he came over from the Phillies in that trade, his extra bases taken rate as a Cardinal that summer was 63%. That's insane. This guy was a magnificent base runner. He really, truly was. And according to Fangraphs and their metric, during the expansion era, began in 1961, Scott Rolen, even now, is rated as the fourth best base runner among third basemen since 1961. Among regular third basemen. Fourth best. Stole over 100 bags. Doesn't sound like much, but you'd be surprised how many guys who hit 300 home runs and stole over 100 bags at third base. It's a really small group. I think it's 4 guys, maybe 5. He was really good, very, very good at running the bases. That's why last night, I was thinking, I feel like I screwed something up because I put a lot of emphasis we should on his defense and even his offense, which was better than people think because they can't get past counting stats. And so everyone kept saying, well, he's good at both sides of the ball, so to speak, or, he was a great two-way player. And I'm like, you know what? What we need to talk about more is sort of close it out. He was a great three-way player because base running was a huge part of his game and his value. And I bet you as I'm saying this right now, because he looked like he was a big guy, I guarantee you there are people listening now texting in saying I'm crazy or rolling their eye. Scott Rolen was a great base runner, period. It's not really an opinion. If you go by how many times he moved up on the bases, how consistent he was, how few times he got thrown out, on and on and on and on, it tells you, it reaffirms that, yeah, this was a dynamic base runner, especially for a big man. And a lot of it is because he was dedicated to being as fundamentally sound or flawless as it was possible to be. So anyway, that's my appreciation of Rolen. Let's not forget that key part of his game because it wasn't just defense and hitting.
6'4", 245 pounds, and over 100 stolen bases.
Yeah.
Really impressive.
Yeah, and there's not too many guys have done that at third base in terms of you had the home runs and the 100 steals and the defense. You've got a rare bird there, no pun intended.